Before he was indicted, Swartz was offered a plea deal that involved 3 months in prison, time in a halfway house, and a year of home detention, all without the use of a computer. It was on the condition that Swartz plead guilty to a felony.
Here we are. We have no discovery, no evidence whatsoever about what the government's case is, and we have to make this immense decision where the lawyer is pushing you to do this, the government is giving you a non-negotiable demand, and you're told that your likelihood of prevailing is small, so whether you're guilty or not, you're better off taking the deal.
Boston has its own computer crimes division, with lots of lawyers, probably more lawyers than they need. So, you can imagine all sorts of cases where it'd be really hard to prosecute because you've got some criminals in Russia, or you've got some people inside of a corporation that are going to have $500 lawyers or $700 an hour lawyers sitting down against you. And then you've got this case with this kid, which is pretty easy to prove that he did something, and he's already marked himself as a troublemaker with the FBI, so why not go as tough as you can in here against that guy? It's good for you, the prosecutor. It's good for the Republic because you're fighting all those terrorist types.
I was so scared. I was so scared of having my computer seized. I was so scared of going to jail because of my computer being seized. I had confidential material from sources from my previous work on my laptop. And that is above all my priority, is to keep my sources safe. I was so scared of what was going to happen to Ada. Aaron told me that they'd offered him a deal, and he finally just said that he would take it if I told him to. And I came real close to saying take it. He had developed serious political aspirations in the intervening time between when, that moment when he ended that entrepreneurial startup life and begun this new life that had come to this political activism. And he just didn't believe that he could continue in his life with a felony. He said to me one day, we were walking by the White House, and he said to me, they don't let felons work there. And he really wanted that to be his life.
He hadn't killed anybody. He hadn't hurt anybody. He hadn't stolen money. He hadn't done anything that seemed felony worthy, right? And there is this idea that there's no reason that he should be labeled a felon and taken away his right to vote in many states for doing what he did. That's just outrageous. It makes sense for him to be, maybe fined a bunch of money or, asked not to come back to MIT again. But to be a felon, to face jail time.
Swartz turned down the plea deal.
Hyman redoubled his efforts. Hyman continued to press us at all levels.
Even with the physical evidence seized from Aaron's Acer computer, hard drive, and USB drive, the prosecutors needed evidence of his motives. Why was Aaron Swartz downloading articles from JSTOR, and just what did he plan to do with them?
The government claims that he was planning to publish these. We don't really know whether that was his real intention, because Aaron also had a history of doing projects where he'd analyze giant data sets of articles in order to learn interesting things about them.
The best evidence for that was that when he was at Stanford, he also had downloaded the whole Westlaw legal database.
In a project with Stanford law students, Swartz had downloaded the Westlaw legal database. He uncovered troubling connections between funders of legal research and favorable results.
He did this amazing analysis of for-profit companies giving money to law professors who wrote law review articles which were then beneficial to Exxon during an oil spill, right? So it was a very corrupt system of funding, vanity research.
Swartz had never released the Westlaw documents.
In theory, he could have been doing the same thing about the JSTOR database. That would have been completely okay. If he were, on the other hand, intending to create a competitive service to JSTOR, we're going to set up our own, access to the Harvard Law Review and charge, money for it, then, okay, now it seems like criminal violation because you're commercially trying to exploit this material, but it's kind of crazy to imagine that's what he was doing. So, but then there's the middle case. Well, what if he was just trying to liberate it for all of the developing world? But depending on what he was doing, it creates a very different character to how the law should be thinking about it. The government was prosecuting him as if this was like a commercial criminal violation, like stealing a whole bunch of credit card records. It was that kind of crime.
I don't know what he was going to do with that database, but I heard from a friend of his that Aaron had told him he was going to analyze the data for evidence of corporate funding of climate change research that led to biased results. And I totally believe that.
I was just told that Steve wanted to talk to me. And I thought, maybe this is a way I could get out of this. Just exit the situation. And I didn't want to live in fear of having my computer seized. I didn't want to live in fear of having to go to jail on a contempt of court charge if they tried to compel me to decrypt my computer. When they came to me and said, Steve wants to talk to you, that seemed reasonable.
They offered Norton what is known as a Queen for a Day letter, or a proffer. It allowed prosecutors to ask questions about Aaron's case. Norton would be given immunity from prosecution herself for any information she revealed during the meeting.
I didn't like it. I told my lawyers repeatedly that this seemed fishy. I didn't like this. I didn't want immunity. I didn't need immunity. I hadn't done anything. But they were really, really stringent that they did not want me meeting the prosecutor without immunity.
But just to be clear, this is a Queen for a Day deal, a proffer.
Right, a proffer letter.
In which you basically handed information over to them in exchange for protection from prosecution.
So it wasn't handing information over. It was, at least that's not how I saw it. It was just having a discussion, having an interview with them.
Well, they're asking you questions.
They're asking me questions.
They can ask about whatever they want.
Right.
And whatever they learn,
I really,
be prosecuted for that.
right. And I repeatedly tried to go in naked. I repeatedly tried to turn down the proffer letter. I was ill. I was being pressured by my lawyers. I was confused. I was not doing well by this point. I was depressed and I was scared and I didn't understand the situation I was in. I had no idea why I was in this situation. I hadn't done anything interesting, much less wrong.
We went out of our minds. Aaron was clearly very distraught about it. We were very distraught about it. Aaron's attorneys were very distraught about it. We tried to get Quinn to change attorneys.
I was very unused to being in a room with large men, well-armed, that are continually telling me I'm lying and that I must have done something. I told them that this thing that they were prosecuting wasn't a crime. I told them that they were on the wrong side of history. I used that phrase. I said, you're on the wrong side of history. And they looked bored. They didn't even look angry. They just looked bored. And it began to occur to me that we weren't having the same conversation. I mean, I told them plenty of things about, why people would download journal articles, and eventually, I don't remember what was around it. I mentioned that he'd done this blog post, the Guerrilla Open Access Manifesto.
This is the Guerrilla Open Access Manifesto, supposedly written in July 2008 in Italy. Information is power. But like all power, there are those who want to keep it for themselves. The world's entire scientific and cultural heritage, published over centuries in books and journals, is increasingly being digitized and locked up by a handful of private corporations. Meanwhile, those who have been locked out are not standing idly by. You've been sneaking through holes and climbing over fences, liberating the information locked up by the publishers and sharing them with your friends. But all this action goes on in the dark, hidden underground. It's called stealing or piracy, as if sharing a wealth of knowledge were the moral equivalent of plundering a ship and murdering its crew. But sharing isn't immoral, it's a moral imperative. Only those blinded by greed would refuse to let a friend make a copy. There's no justice in following unjust laws. It's time to come into the light and, in the grand tradition of civil disobedience, declare our opposition to this private theft of public culture.
The manifesto itself was allegedly written by 4 different people and also edited by Norton. But it was Swartz who had signed his name to it.
When it's over, I go immediately to Aaron and tell him everything I can remember about it. And he gets very angry. The things that I'd done shouldn't have added up that way. I hadn't done anything wrong, and everything had gone wrong. But I was never... I'm still angry. I'm still angry that you can try your best with these people to do the right thing, and they will turn everything against you, and they will hurt you with anything they can. And in that moment, I regret that I said what I did. But my much larger regret is that we have settled for this, that we are okay with this. That we are okay with a justice system that tries to game people into little traps so they can ruin their lives. So yeah, I wish I hadn't said that, but I am much, much angrier that this is where I am. That this is what we as a people think is okay.
They used every method that I think they could think of to get her to provide information which would be unhelpful to Aaron and helpful to the prosecution of Aaron. Right. But you know, I don't think she had information that was helpful to the government.
Months go by as Swartz's friends and family await a looming indictment. In the meantime, Swartz was becoming a go-to expert on a series of internet issues.
To you then, do you think that the internet is something that should be considered a human right and something that the government cannot take away from you?
Yes, definitely. I mean, this notion that national security is an excuse to shut down the internet, that's exactly what we heard in Egypt and Syria and all these other countries. And so, yeah, it's true. Sites like WikiLeaks are going to be putting up some embarrassing material about what the U.S. government does, and people are going to be organizing to protest about it and try and change their government. You know, and that's a good thing. That's what all these First Amendment rights of free expression, of freedom of association are all about. And so the notion that we should try and shut those down, I think, just goes against very basic American principles. The principle, I think, is one that our founding fathers would have understood. If the internet had been around back then, instead of putting post offices in the Constitution, they would have put ISPs.
Well, it's definitely interesting to see how...
Schwartz meets activist Terrence Steinbrickner-Kaufman, and the two begin to date.
We need a massive global public outcry.
If there's no massive global public outcry, it won't create any change.
You know, 4 people in this city should cause a massive global public outcry.
You know, we need a petition signer.
Without telling her specifics, he warned her he was involved in something he called simply the bad thing.
And I had sort of crazy theories, like that he was having an affair with Elizabeth Warren or something. I speculated both Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren, actually, but... So sometime in probably late July, Aaron called me, and I happened to pick up, and he said, you know, the bad thing might be in the news tomorrow. Do you want me to tell you, or do you want to read about it in the news? And I said, well, I want you to tell me. And he said, well, I've been arrested for downloading too many academic journal articles, and they want to make an example out of me. And I was like, that's it? That's the big fuss? Really? Like, this doesn't sound like a very big deal.
On July 14th, 2011, federal prosecutors indict Swartz on 4 felony counts.
He gets indicted on the same day that like 2 people in England who are part of LulzSec get arrested, and like a few other real hackers. And Aaron is just like someone who kind of looks like a hacker, enough that they can like, you know, put his head on a stake and like put it on the gates.
Aaron went to surrender, and they arrested him. They then strip searched him, took away his shoelaces, took away his belt, and left him in solitary confinement.
The District of Massachusetts United States Attorney's Office released a statement saying Swartz faces up to 35 years in prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release, restitution, forfeiture, and a fine of up to $1 million. He is released on $100,000 bail. The same day, the primary victim in the case, JSTOR, formally drops all charges against Swartz and declines to pursue the case.
JSTOR, they weren't our friends, they weren't helpful or friendly to us, but they also were just kind of like, we're not part of this.
JSTOR and their parent company, Ithaca, also sidestepped requests to talk with this film. But at the time, they released a statement saying it was the government's decision whether to prosecute, not JSTOR's.
And so it's our belief that with that, the case will be over. That we should be able to get Steve Hyman to drop the case or settle it in some rational way. And the government refused.
Why?
Well, because I think they wanted to make an example out of Aaron. And they said they wanted to, the reason why they wouldn't move on requiring a felony conviction and jail time was that they wanted to use this case as a case of for deterrence. They told us that.
They told you that?
Yes.
This was going to be an example?
Yes.
He was going to be an example?
Yes. Steve Hyman said that.
Deterring who? Like, there's other people out there running around logging onto JSTOR and downloading the articles to make a political statement? I mean, who are they deterring?
It would be easier to understand the Obama administration's posture of supposedly being for deterrence if this was an administration that, for instance, prosecuted arguably the biggest economic crime that this country has seen in the last 100 years, the crimes that were committed that led to the financial crisis on Wall Street. When you start deploying the non-controversial idea of deterrence only selectively, you stop making a dispassionate analysis of lawbreaking, and you started deciding to deploy law enforcement resources specifically on the basis of political ideology. And that's not just undemocratic, it's supposed to be un-American.